Well, folks, we're back with another March of the Lich King card review. This time around, we've got Mage and Druid cards, including a couple legendaries like this fella, Vexillus, a new 5-mana 3/5 elemental. And he reads, your arcane spells cast twice. And this is going to be the introduction of a pretty significant arcane package that we're going to talk about in this video. I want to give you a preview of a couple cards to give us context here. This will discount your arcane spells by 1. This is Sorcerer's Apprentice, specifically for arcane spells. And then we've also got Arcane Bolt, a new 2 damage arcane spell that kind of goes up to 3. And you're going to see a few ways to make extra copies of these as well. So all in all, these are basically 0 mana damage spells that go off twice, and with this wording, as we've seen in other cards in Hearthstone history, they will target the same target in this case if they're targeted spells like the Arcane Bolt. Other spells may be different depending on whether they're randomly summoning and so on, but you can see a little combo here. Even just 7 mana after you've built up quite a few of these could be some silly burst damage on top of what other like spell damage or modifiers you can pull together. And that's pretty crazy. That's actually rather nuts. The Vexillus does have, you know, this 5 mana overhead. It's going to take some mana commitment to set these sorts of things up. And that does probably preclude this from being good with higher cost spells. For instance, we saw that 8 mana arcane spell earlier in the reveal season that summoned you some big taunt minions. That's going to be hard to work with Vexillus, because he would basically have to stick on board for an entire extra turn for that sort of thing to be a reliable game plan. Although maybe you could have some discounts with Big Spell Mage, Belinda making things cost 5. There are possibilities, but I think that will be far less reliable and probably not how you're going to often use this card. But that said, here, the effect on this is so big that even at that 5 mana overhead cost, I think there's still going to be a lot of options. That combo right there, just these 3 things together, looks pretty insane to me to start. And there are lots of other good arcane spells available as well. In fact, here you can see the current set in standard format, things like Arcane Intellect, just drawing you 4 cards, right? Runed Orbs can actually be pretty nuts, just getting a couple discovers and some damage. Gosh, I don't know why you'd want to, but you could even Arcane Brilliance into lots and lots of copies of giant spells in your deck. I don't think that's going to be common, but you can see here a lot of potential for Vexillus, and I don't think you need much beyond what we're seeing teased here in this video. So I think this card definitely has some powerful potential. Yeah, so next up here we have the Magister's Apprentice, and this is a 2-mana 3/2, literally just the Sorcerer's Apprentice original stat line, but this time only affecting arcane spells, not all spells like the Sorcerer's Apprentice of old, which of course is a much healthier design, allows Blizzard to control here a little bit more what can be done on the back of a Magister's Apprentice and not make anything too scary or crazy good with it. Although that said, we do have the Arcane Bolt here introduced, which again, making these 0 mana, I don't know, shenanigans definitely seem like they could be afoot. All kinds of mana cheat and cycling, and who knows what else is possible here with the Magister's Apprentice. And I mean, this is a good effect, right? And I have to imagine that it's gonna work well. We've already talked about a few of the arcane spells that'll line up really nicely. I could see some giant pop-off turns where you're just discovering a lot of cards, cycling through cards, drawing a ton of cards, and it's all going to be on the back of the Magister's Apprentice. So, of course, yeah, I think this card's going to be very powerful, much like every card that has had a similar effect in the past will be powerful. The only thing holding this back is that arcane limitation, but I think there will still be plenty to work through as we're going to see more and more ways to get some arcane cards put into hand. Now, on top of that, we've also got a few cards here that are making more Arcane Bolts. This is the Arcane Worm, a 1-mana 1/2 battlecry, add an Arcane Bolt to your hand. And yeah, I think that's going to be great. Just get a 1-drop down, get that resource in hand, whether you're stacking that up for some big combo or just using it right away for a little bit of a tempo swing. I think that's fine. This is a card that gets you rolling, gets things moving, gets the gears turning, and potentially plays for some bigger combos and synergies. This looks like a really nice free staple for any sort of arcane deck. And then on top of that, we've also got the Arc Splitter here. This is a 3-mana 3/2 with a Death Rattle this time around. Add 2 Arcane Bolts to your hand. So now between the natural Arcane Bolts and the 2 Arc Splitters and the two arcane worms here. We've got what, 2, 4, 6, 8 arcane bolts stacking up across all of these different cards, which you know, that's, you're not maybe gonna want to keep all of those. You're not often gonna have all of those because you got hand size problems if you get too many, right? But still, you can see yourself very easily getting 4, 5, 6 arcane bolts throughout the course of the game and using those once again in a variety of successful ways. So this package looks really cohesive and really synergistic for me, and I could see this doing some scary stuff. And as far as the Arc Splitter kind of on its own independently might still just be good, a card like this is just giving you some extra resources in hand. That's not bad. Stat line here is not great, but you know, it's giving you some stuff. And often cards that are these little sort of speed bumps that give you stuff can work out really well in Hearthstone. So I think both the Arc Splitter and the Mana Worm are probably independently okay at some level, and then perhaps really, really good when you consider them in combination with these other synergistic pieces. All right, so next up here, we have some Druid cards, and some of these will look a little familiar if you were paying attention to social media. They got revealed during the, or leaked, let's say, during the Death Knight show match, which, by the way, my team won. Yay. We took home the prize. If you want to see more of those videos, stay tuned. I got, I think, at least one more on the way and a couple already out if you want to see some early Death Knight action. But anyway, you might have seen these cards before. That said, we're catching up now with the reviews that they're officially revealed. This is Elder Nadox, a 5-mana 5/4 undead. Battlecry, destroy a friendly undead. Your minions gain its attack. So potentially a pretty scary buff here for token Druid decks. If you've got, you know, 4 or 5 minions out, Nadox can come down and kill perhaps the biggest one, maybe after you've attacked face with it, for instance, and buff the rest of your board for like 3 or 4 attack or something, right? And be this kind of bloodlust that's permanent. They're going to keep the attack and a 5/4 on top of it. So, you know, this big buff on a stick, if you will, with the Nadox. And clearly, in that ideal scenario, that's really powerful, of course. Creating a far more aggressive board puts your opponent on the back foot. You're getting some extra body down with the Nadox, you know, 5/4 stat line's a nice little bonus on top of this effect. You might even activate a Death Rattle or something along the way from the Destroy effect. So yeah, you can definitely see why that's really good. Now, on the other side of things, I think there's going to be a lot of scenarios where Nadox is pretty dead. In other words, you don't have 3 or 4 minions on board, or you don't have a great target to destroy, or you know, you have 2 minions on board and you gotta destroy one of them just to sort of kind of buff the other one. Or you have no minions on board and this is just a 5-mana 5/4. And that's the real question here. How often is Nadox gonna hit that home run scenario versus how often is Nadox just completely gonna whiff and strike out? And it really just depends on, I'd say, the success of the rest of the Undead package for Druid, because this is gonna be restricted specifically to undead token decks, because this has to destroy an undead to work. It's going to be really hard if you don't have that critical mass of undead in your deck to make sure this has that reliability. And man, when you start adding checks and conditions and clunky board states to the card here, I get really nervous for it. I think very often this is going to feel awkward rather than good. The question then becomes, are the high roll moments or the really powerful turns worth sacrificing those down turns? Is it worth tanking the times this is dead because it's so game winning when it hits? I am not totally convinced. The other side of this is if token undead Druid's just really good, and I think it has some potential to be, does Nadox just make the cut because it's there and it works, and it's maybe not your favorite card, and yeah, it's dead sometimes, but it just helps complete the package. It just kind of fits, even if it's not always perfect. That might actually be the most likely outcome. This is one of those cards that's like, yeah, Nadox is only good like 1 out of 3 games or 1 out of 4 games, but what else am I gonna run? What is a better alternative? Maybe you don't have one, and Nadox is fine in that regard. So that's really where I think Nadox is gonna go. I think Undead Token Druid will probably be a real deck, and Nadox will feel like an okay card, and it's just not an outstanding one. So talking about token undead Druid stuff, let's look at the Lingering Zombie here. This is a 1-mana 1/1 undead with a Death Rattle. Summon a 1/1 disarm zombie with Death Rattle. Summon a 1/1 zombie. So yeah, this is actually 3 minions, 3 layers here of Death Rattles. Spammy Arcanist is just so excited to see this one. But that's, of course, not a real downside. This card's insane, right? We've seen so many possessed villager style cards in this mold where you get, you know, 2 bodies and you're really happy because you get this sticky early game minion. And this is the stickiest of early game minions because you get 3 parts to it, which is great when you're trying to develop a board to then later buff in your token druid decks. That's exactly what you want, stuff that hangs around so that it gets buffed later and you leverage that. And, you know, having a couple of these sticking around into your Nadox, for instance, that's awesome. I've got some extra bodies that are very likely to be there for Nadox to work. Now, that said, they might still get tidied up by the time turn 5 rolls around, but certainly you could see weaving these into some mid-game turns, a couple of these 1/1s hanging out. And I think those are the most likely targets for Nadox, and often might be the only targets for Nadox that actually that stand the test of time all the way to turn 5. But that's a great building block, and this is the exact reason I said in our last card why I think Undead Token Druid is probably going to be a deck, even if Nadox isn't the star of the show. This card might actually be the star of the show, even though it's the humble common 1-drop. This might be the reason that deck actually works and comes together, just because it is so sticky. It is such a great building block for all the follow-ups that you're looking for. So I think the Lingering Zombie looks very good. It's historically a model that has succeeded, and it just takes it to the next level in a deck that's, or class at least, that's a great fit for it. That is a big recipe for success. So next up here we have Wither, a new 2-mana spell for Druid. It's a nature spell, and it reads, choose a minion. Each friendly undead steals 1 attack and health from it. And you know what? I actually think this card's pretty nifty, particularly when you think about the Lingering Zombie and the odds of having a few undead that are hanging around on any given board state. You know, maybe you're going into turn 4 and you got a couple minions that manage to stick, and you're going to play another one with it, and then you've got a Wither in hand, and your opponent has that juicy 3/3 on board that they played the previous turn, and you plop down your 2-mana thing and you Wither that 3/3. Your 3 undead are each going to steal some stats. So this becomes a Power of the Wild on your side of the board, giving everything +1/+1, and it just removes a 3/3 for you. I think those sort of scenarios are actually going to line up fairly often. I mean, Hearthstone ultimately is like, I'm going to try to remove your stuff and play my thing. And opponents are often leaving minions out on board to be absorbed by cards like Wither. Clearly, there will also be clunky board states where they don't have anything on board, or you don't really have the right amount of undead. Like maybe they have a 4/4 and you've only got 2 undead, and you're not really thrilled that you just kind of debuff their minion. But it'll still be okay. I think the bigger risk perhaps is playing a class that's like a really heavy control deck, like Priest or Warrior, and they're just not playing any minions for you, and then your Wither is like, oh boy, that's a little clunky. I don't have anything to steal. But do note it doesn't say enemy minion, so you can actually still maybe like sacrifice a minion you're playing this turn. It could really even be your Nadox, for instance. You could play a Nadox, and then you could Wither your Nadox, since it can attack right away, and then buff the rest of your board with your own minion. Like, clearly that's 7 mana. Clearly it's not perfect, but you get the idea. In a pinch, this has that flexibility to trade the thing you're playing now that does not have the immediate attack upside to buff things that are in play already and do have the immediate attack upside. You could see that being pretty interesting. Now, this again is restricted specifically to decks that are running that critical mass of undead. These all have this very tight synergy check. So it's going to be feast or famine for a lot of these. It either will work or it won't, and the cards will live and die by that. But I actually think this is going to work, and I think Wither will feel like a decent card in this package. So next up here we have Unending Swarm, a new Druid spell, 6 mana, resurrect all friendly minions that cost 2 or less. And man, that's a pretty cool reload option for some of these undead token decks we've been talking about. You can clearly see yourself killing off 7 minions by the time you get to turn 6. I think most of them will have been 2 or less mana. I mean, the Lingering Zombie itself represents 3 minions, right? 2 of which have these like sticky death rattles on the back end. So those could be pretty nice resurrect targets. They're not going to be inherently threatening by their own stat total, but the mere presence of them and the threat of follow-up buffs and damage will certainly make that an intimidating board for many opponents to have to deal with. Not to mention, of course, that other minions might be bigger. There could be some good 2-drops with death rattles and a little more threatening stat lines, of course. So yes, I could see this being a nice reload option for a token deck. Like, you've played wave after wave of wide board, they've answered it, they've barely kept up, and then this is the final big reload that like breaks their back and they just can't quite deal with the unending swarm, of course. Now, another interesting use case for this card that might be even more promising is with Scale of Onyxia. Scale of Onyxia makes 7 2/1 rush minions for 7 mana. It's amazing. Druids love playing it. It offers them a ton of swing potential. It offers them so much removal. And this is basically, after you've played a Scale of Onyxia, another Scale of Onyxia for 6 mana. Suddenly they have 4 Scales of Onyxia. Those all feed into the Denathrius. And there you've got yourself a crazy package for a bigger Druid deck that's running those scales for that reactivity. Normally I'd say like, oh, this would, you know, this is bad because you have to wait till you've played a scale to get this off. But with all the card draw available to Druid, I really don't even think that'd be a huge risk. If this has to sit in hand a little bit longer till you find your scale, so be it. It's still going to be a really big payoff. So I think that's actually another angle for this card that's pretty interesting, both the token side and maybe even in a bigger Scale of Onyxia style Druid. This could be really good. Vexilus is a 4-star card. Magister's Apprentice is a 5-star card. Arcane Worm is a 4-star card. Arc Splitter is a 4-star card. Elder Nadox is a 3-star card. Unending Swarm is a 4-star card. Lingering Zombie is a 4-star card. Wither is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. Curious to hear your thoughts on these cards. Is this arcane spell package scary, or is it going to be okay? Let me know what you think. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.